Now, coming up in a couple of minutes, a very special guest on the show. Remember these guys?
Marco, Mary, Terry Lee, Gary's in, you're Julie, in the safety sound. We're all singing.
Now, many of us can name all of Adam and the Ants thanks to the very catchy ant rap. Merrick, a.k.a. Chris Hughes, the drummer with the Ants and producer with Paul McCartney, Robert Plant, Tears for Fears and Lloyd Cole, who provides our classic album tonight. We'll hear for Chris very shortly after another one of your Sundays. From 1980, Adam and the Ants, Ant Music. You're listening to BBC Radio Wales. Sue Charles with you tonight, and I'm delighted that we're joined by Chris Hughes, the drummer and producer with the Ants. Chris has also produced some of the biggest names in music: Tears for Fears, Paul McCartney, Robert Plant, Lloyd Cole, and many, many more. Chris Hughes, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Now, Chris, you're also known as Chris Merrick Hughes, and thanks to a very clever Adam and the Ants song, 80s pop fans know exactly who you are. So, Chris, I only need to say Marco, Merrick, Terry Lee.
Gary Tibbs and yours truly.
Fantastic. No, that was the brilliant call and response from Ant Rap, and that meant that a generation of us can name every single member of Adam and the Ants.
Yeah, it's kind of boy bandish.
Very clever. One of the early rap singles, you were a groundbreaking, a massively successful group of the 80s. How did you meet Adam and join the Ants?
Travel back in time with me to late 79, 1980. I'd been working with a band called Dalek I Love You in Liverpool, brought the recordings back to London, met a guy called Ian Tregonning. He had a label called Do It Records, and Adam was releasing tracks with Do It Records. I went up to their offices and I met Adam, and I'd been working on some of his material, and he walked in and said, "I don't know who you are, but if you're any good, record us now. We're ready to go." And what had happened is that round about that week, Malcolm McLaren, who'd been working with Adam, they'd had a parting of the ways, and Malcolm and the band went off to form Bow Wow Wow, and Adam was left looking for a new group, and he was desperate to start recording with a new group. And he was telling me about Marco and all the things he was hoping to do, and he was talking about pirates and Burundi drumming, and it was fascinating and amazing. And things moved very, very fast in those days. By the end of that week, we came down to Monmouth in Wales, to the very famous Rockfield Studios, and we recorded 2 songs, Kick and Car Trouble, and it started from there. I mean, I started working with Adam. He had loads of songs, loads of ideas. The band got signed very quickly to CBS, and we went off and made the first. In fact, we made the first album, the Kings of the Wild Frontier album, in Wales.
So Kings of the Wild Frontier then, produced by you at Rockfield Studios in Monmouth. So from 1980 onwards then, the hits came thick and fast. Ant Music, we heard there, Dog Eat Dog, Car Trouble, as you said. And then by 1981, Stand and Deliver, Prince Charming. It was all really taking off.
It was taking off, and it was fast. It was fast and furious and lots of fun. And, we'd record a track, and then, by the end of the month, we'd hear it on the radio.
I imagine as well that it must have been very thrilling, but recording, touring, fast-moving must have been so exhausting, and also having tabloids follow at your every move.
Well, with some level of success and notoriety, you do get tabloids and the press wanting to know what's going on. Actually, for me, I have to say they followed Adam more than they did the rest of the band, but there was a general interest, and you could be somewhere and someone might ask a question about what the band were up to and try and prize some kind of story out of a band member. But, Adam was pretty good at keeping things private, a lot of the time. I think the press were waiting for us to be decadent or outrageous, and a lot of the time we weren't,
Did you not quite live up to their expectations?
Well, I think probably the most decadent thing I did was throw my TV Times out the window.
So you were very hard-working, because decadence is one thing, but to have that turnover, you must have been working so hard. And I imagine there was an element of burnout
There was an element of burnout. There was an element of burnout in the studio. You know, you'd go in and you'd come out and it'd be the next morning and you'd lost track of time. And then there was an element of burnout in terms of, you know, doing a gig in Sweden and then finding out you had a number one record and you'd fly back to do Top of the Pops and all that sort of stuff is tiring. It's exciting. When you're young, you think you're bulletproof, so you kind of plough on, but it takes its toll. And I think Adam had a lot of pressure on him. And I think there came a point where, well, he invited me for lunch one day and he said, I've got to tell you, I need to stop the band now. It's, you know, we're all exhausted and I want to try something else.
So by the end of 1981, after the huge success, after being absolutely everywhere and everyone knowing who you were, it was all coming to an end. And then you worked with Adam on his solo project.
Yeah, he said, yeah, so I want to stop the band, but I'd still like to continue working with you and Marco. And I said, that's fine, we can do that. And we went into the studio and did Goody Two Shoes, which I absolutely loved making. The drums were set up in the huge Abbey Road studio down in the basement, number one, the big one, and I had the drum kit right in the middle. It's like an aircraft hangar. I had the drum kit on a riser right in the middle, and they were very loud, and it was very rocking. I loved it.
After working with the Ants and then with Adam on his solo project, you were in huge demand as a producer and began working with Tears for Fears.
Yes, it turned out that the guys in Tears for Fears had actually heard the Dalek I Love You record I'd been doing at the beginning of the interview, and they liked that, and it was part of why I ended up working with them. I travelled down to Bath where they were living and met up with them. We talked about music and we talked about what they wanted to achieve, and you know, it was a good set of conversations. And once again, very quickly, we went in and recorded in Brit Row Studios in London, Mad World.
Chris, The Hurting was a huge breakthrough album, and you had some big hit singles from that.
Yeah, it was wonderful that a record that was so experimental, or we thought it was so well received. And, you know, there were a handful of tracks that did go on and were successful.
Like Pale Shelter, Change, Mad World we mentioned.
Indeed.
So lots of big hits that led to the second album.
Yeah, I mean, I really liked Pale Shelter. I loved the fact that it was essentially electronic and synths, but this very clear message of acoustic guitar. So I love that song.
And quite a dark album.
It is dark. I mean, the title, The Hurting, it's about a journey. That I think they were both interested in therapy and, you know, primal scream therapy, and some of the writing does reflect that. There is a bittersweet sadness in that record, but that's part of how great it is.
A classic from Tears for Fears. You're listening to BBC Radio Wales. We're talking tonight with Chris Merrick Hughes, drummer with Adam and the Ants, producer with Tears for Fears, Paul McCartney, Robert Plant, and many more. Now, Chris, Everybody Wants to Rule the World was co-written by you.
It was.
And by chance, I was sitting next to you at the Tears for Fears reunion concert last year at the Royal Albert Hall, and I vividly remember that when they played that, everyone was singing, everyone knew all the words, and you were sitting back, looking around, taking it all in. What's it like watching everyone sing your song?
Well, it's great, highly enjoyable. I think the greatest part, though, was listening to how beautifully they played it live. I mean, it was a stunning version. And, yeah, it was great. I did sit back and watch everybody. But I watched everybody enjoying the band.
I guess that a song like that takes on a life of its own.
Yeah, in fact, very nearly didn't take on a life, because I had heard Roland just strumming the two main chords in the song over and over again. And he didn't really want to do anything with it. And I said, what are those chords? Let's have a look. And I built a little sequencer program, and downtime in the studio, every now and again I'd play this little sequence I'd built of the shuffle and the chords. And Roland's wife said, oh, that's really, really nice. And I said, yeah, it is really nice. Tell your husband, because he's not that bothered about it. And eventually I got everyone to agree to sort of sit down and build and write and finish the song. So that's how, it was a co-write, yeah, so that's how that worked.
So we have Roland or Isabel's late wife to thank for bringing about
We do. Yeah.
Everybody Wants to Rule the World.
Yeah, we do.
So things then began to change because that was such a big LP. We had Head Over Heels, Shout, Everybody Wants to Rule the World. So songs from the big chair, then the pressure to come up with a follow-up took its toll on the band.
I think so. We talked about not putting too much pressure on ourselves. But the pressure arrived and it was difficult. And the album that came after was long. You know, I worked on that record for about 11 months and basically fizzled out. And I think the pressure was there. I think the guys in the band weren't enjoying working with each other as much. And there was definitely tensions. Good music came out from that project in the end, but it did take some time. I went off to New York, and there were other projects and other things that seemed interesting, and I went off and did that, and in fact made an album with Rick Akasek from the Cars. Came back to England having finished that, and the Tears lads were still working on their record. So it was a long process, but parts of it were really enjoyable and very rewarding. I remember thoroughly loving recording Sowing the Seeds of Love. I played drums on that. It was a wonderful set of sessions.
So Chris, a wonderful if difficult album to produce. By the time then that Sowing the Seeds of Love was a hit, you were starting to go your separate ways.
I think so, yes. There was things that they wanted to do, things I wanted to do, and there were other projects.
Then you were in huge demand as a producer and went on to work with a lot of other artists.
I did. I just one of those things. I ended up working for a fairly short period of time with Paul McCartney. I did an album with Robert Plant, which was fantastic to work with him. I did some work on Peter Gabriel's album So.
Now these are big names to name drop there, Chris. So with Paul McCartney,
forgive me for the name drop.
Not at all, if you've got it. But so with Paul McCartney, that was Flowers in the Dirt.
Yeah, he was finishing that record off, and he had a track called Motor of Love, which he hadn't finished. By a series of phone calls, got in touch and asked me if I'd like to help him finish it off, which was great, which I thoroughly loved.
What an honour. It's McCartney.
Yeah, it was great.
And you worked on quite a big hit, a big radio hit with Robert Plant.
Yes, I did. I did the album Fate of Nations with Robert, and there are a couple of tracks I really loved. One of them was 29 Palms, which was a sizable radio hit in America. And If I Were a Carpenter, we did a cover version of that, which I played drums on both of those and produced those. That was, they were nice tunes.
And Lloyd Cole as well. I mean, in fact, Chris, could you just name some more, because it's almost like a who's who of British pop.
Okay, Lloyd Cole. I've worked with him. He's, in fairness, Lloyd's a bit of a mate, so he phones up and says, "I've got a track that isn't right. Do you want to have a listen and see what you think?" And I'll say, "Yeah, you got to sing the vocal again," and that kind of stuff. So that's kind of. I've done a fair amount of hanging in the studio with Lloyd and saying, "No, do that again." Howard Jones is another great artist who we became friends when I was living in New York, and I've sat in on sessions with him and produced various bits and pieces. So
we claim Howard Jones as Welsh as well.
Well,
so
that's worth mentioning from that alone.
Cardiff's finest, Howard Jones.
Yeah.
And I guess after all that success, it was nice to sit back and pick and choose who you work with. And also then, by the 90s, take time out of music to do other things, like researching your family tree now, which has brought you back to Wales.
Well, I had some time, and I didn't know my father's parents that well, and I started doing a bit of tree research, and indeed they were from Wales. They were married in a church in Buckley, and I travelled over to the church and did a bit of backstage because the people there showed me their wedding certificate from 1925. It was amazing, just going around the whole area and feeling a bit more Welsh.
Now, if I lived in Flintshire, I'd be thrilled to know that Merrick from Adam and the Ants was travelling back and forth to trace the family tree. And you've also got connections along the west coast, along Cardigan Bay.
Most summers when I was growing up, I'd go stay on a farm in a place called Penbryn. In fact, Penbryn Beach is absolutely beautiful. And so, yeah, my mum and dad, we used to go and do a bit of Wales there.
Penbryn Beach is a beautiful part of West Wales. And you've also done a couple of solo albums. So the first one released in the mid-90s, and your latest one, Eirenic Life, which is a real labour of love.
Yes, I'm very proud of it. It's quite a solitary work, very reflective. The name Eirenic refers to the quest for peace and calm. So yeah, I did it on my own, in my own time. And it took a long time, and thoroughly enjoyed it.
Now, after a life in rock and roll, it's a real chill-out album. I've been listening. It's a bit, almost a bit yogic, a bit like Sigur Rós.
Well, thank you for saying that. Sigur Rós, fantastic band. It's reflective. I did spend a lot of time trying to get the mood and the atmosphere right.
So let's end then, Chris, with a song from Eirenic Life. And, you tell us, which song would you like to play?
The track I'd like to play is called Dilly's Dream. Dilly was a cat, and in fact it's another Welsh connection here, because Dilly's short for Dilys, which I believe is a Welsh Christian name.
So Dilly's Dream is almost like Dilys's Dream, then, a very
Indeed.
popular Welsh name. Chris Merrick Hughes, it's been a thrill having you on the show, talking about your incredible career, working with Adam and the Ants, Tears for Fears, Paul McCartney, Peter Gabriel, Robert Plant, and so many more. Chris, an absolute pleasure. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.